Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for the launch of the Maritime Policy Statement. We're going to go ahead and kick things off with the chairman of the Maritime Policy Committee, Sinclair Harris. Sink, over to you.
And thank you, Luke. And I want to thank you all for joining us for this year's Navy League Maritime Policy Statement discussion. And it is meant to be a discussion. So get your questions over to us earlier. Since the inception of the Navy League, established by President Theodore Roosevelt, we have emphasized the need for a strong maritime force, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and U.S. merchant fleet. America is undoubtedly a maritime nation, and our safety, security, and prosperity depend on strength in this domain, working within the joint force and with our partners and allies. American sea power is essential to global security. Now, please note from the outset, this policy statement is independently done and does not mean to supplant or speak for any of the sea services, nor does it speak for the different firms or organizations that we members who wrote the policy statement work for. These are our own personal views based on our own research. Now, this year, we have an all-digital format for our policy statement. This allows more content, links to current policies and information, so please stay tuned and revisit it often as we endeavor to keep it up to date and fresh, especially as we've got a new administration and changes. There'll be more comments, more information to come out. Additionally, we wrote this policy statement in a functional manner, and we didn't stovepipe it according to each of the sea services. Now, this hopefully gets to the heart of key issues for you, the reader and reviewer, but still provides enough substance for each of the services to get into more depth. We start this year's Maritime Policy Statement with a call to action. What does that mean? A call for each of us, Navy League members, government leaders, those interested in enhancing American sea power, to take action to ensure that we encourage all Americans to look for ways to support our sea services, be it in uniform, as civilians in government, or in industry. To our elected officials, we want to make sure that they know how important American sea power is now and into the future as part of that joint force. And also to enlighten all Americans about the need to support, educate, and advocate for America's sea power. Now, we start after that with the geostrategic overview. I'm not going to belabor what you have more than likely read in newspapers, heard on the radio, television, every single day. From the Arctic to the Red Sea, from Ukraine to the South China Sea, from the seabed to space, the competition with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others is palpable. And the challenges continue to grow with each passing day. It is our global maritime force, American sea power, operating at the tip of the spear in all these domains and areas that are keeping them free, keeping our sea lanes open, and maintaining order. Please check out that section for more details. And again, it's going to continue to evolve over time. We also speak to the workforce, recruiting, retention, development. And just like in private industry, our military, our uniform, our civilians have to learn more and new things all the time. And the challenge, the war on talent, as many have called it, is there and it's real. This past year, I think most of the sea services did okay in recruiting, but they've got to recruit a lot to keep up and retain. We end the policy statement with a look into training, doctrine, and experimentation. America has always been a leader in this area, but we need to invest even more because the threats, the challenges continue to grow. So the training has to be as efficient and effective as possible. The doctrine has to keep up. And experimentation, we got to learn to fail fast and keep moving to keep up with and keep ahead of our competitors and the challenges. Now, it is my great honor to work with this committee, who is going to have a few introductory remarks. I'm going to start with Travis and Christian, who will talk more about weapons and technology development. Then we're going to go to Scott, who's going to speak to the always challenging area of operations, maintenance, and sustainment. And last but not least, we're going to the industrial base and the merchant fleet, and John will go into that in more detail. We're going to keep our remarks short because we want to hear from you. We want you to start sending those questions into the Q&A so that Luke can ask it to us. But I want to start off by thanking you, gentlemen, for being the key writers and researchers for this year's Maritime Policy Statement for the Navy League of the United States. Travis, Christian, over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Sink. I appreciate the time, and thanks you for the introduction. Everybody, glad to be here today, too. My name's Travis Reese. In brief introduction, spent 21 years in the Marine Corps, retired in 2016. And for the purposes of this document, really became involved in the Marine Corps force design efforts in earnest as a scenario planner and designer in 2019. Principally developed a lot of the defense planning scenarios that were used for the Marine Corps' wargaming and developmental efforts for force design, and since have moved on, taking those wargames and scenarios into support to Marine Corps Logistics Command and Marine Corps Systems Command, are two of the organizations I support right now. So I've really been developing an understanding or awareness more about the industrial base and some of the requirements that we have in that area, which is sort of the focus of our section, technology and weapons advancement. With this opportunity here to be with the Maritime Policy Statement team and to work with this great set of peers, not only has this been an interactive learning environment, we've been able to really share a lot about some of the underlying issues that have been affecting the capacity of the maritime services to be able to meet modern challenges. My section, along with my co-author Christian, who I'll introduce next, really focuses on technology, but not the grand scheme of technology, but particularly those areas that affect the industrial base, the organic industrial base, and sustainment of the force. So our recommendations are based on 5 practical and implementable tools that can be used immediately on the waterfront and in the within the supporting establishment that can really advance the ability of the sea services to maintain the force so that we can then project the force, and also will improve the cycle time and speed of our maintenance and sustainment activities. The second area that we talk about is weapons, and we don't do a detailed breakdown of the platforms and investments that are currently in there. You can find a lot of that within both the service budgets and what's being talked about within DoD. But what we basically address are 2 things. One, the depth of the magazine, the need to restore that and accelerate those requirements to have the capacities necessary to be able to engage forward. And the second thing is we talk about the expanded force protection requirements. So as we're seeing with Red Sea activities, and those areas in which the U.S. had supplemented, for example, Israel's air defense in their recent engagements with Iran, there are a lot of ways that our force that used to be robust enough to protect our merchant fleets and a lot of the non-battle force elements won't necessarily be available there. So we need to think about their force protection requirements too, to keep them active inside the space and be able to meet that force and keep them persistent and forward. So those are really the 2 recommendation categories that are inside of the technology section. I'll turn this over to Christian to introduce himself, but also sort of talk about the implications of what we've written and where that affects policymakers and potentially decision makers for budgets going forward. Last note I'll kind of put on this too is our section really covers the gamut of things that have been talked about across multiple administrations and a long-term diagnosis of the industrial base. So these are longer-term trends that have been influenced and will probably be ones that continue well past the current administration. So we would like those to be considered in terms of a long-term framing. Christian, over to you.
Thanks, Travis. Christian Cabinets, 30-year Marine. I spent my last couple of years on active duty down at 2MEF working with 2nd Fleet and 6th Fleet, focused on the initial parts of force design. And since then, I've remained, like Travis, tangential involvement in force design, supporting Headquarters Marine Corps and other agencies. And like Travis said, the challenge that we have, and I listen to a lot of congressional hearings, and I know many of y'all do as well, is that everything tends to be presented as an either or. We do fight tonight, we do now, or we do sometime distantly in the future. To talk about distant future, as a plebe at the Naval Academy in 1986, I was taught about the MV-22 and the F-35 that were going to be in the fleet by the time I was a lieutenant. So we all know those things have taken a lot longer. But really, what we have to remind ourselves is we don't do one or the other. We have to do both. One, we have to enable the fleet and the MEF to fight tonight against an increasingly capable enemy. The enemies that we faced in Afghanistan and Iraq during my time are the beneficiaries of the proliferation of many new technologies. So the force on the tactical edge now needs a much more capable ability to persist, all domain force protection, so that they can prevail. While at the same time, we have to support long-term competition, the technological development that's going to be necessary to ensure that we maintain advantage so that any force that we send forward at the tactical edge can persist and prevail at any time as long as our nation might live. One of the bigger challenges that I see looking forward is the understanding of technological maturity. We tend to think, especially on the DoD side, differently than the commercial world looks. And as many know right now, technological development is really accelerating in the commercial world. When we say sustained, when we talk about DoD being able to sustain a demand signal, what that means from a DoD perspective may not mean the same thing from a commercial world. So what we have to do is ensure that senior leaders within the Department of Defense, especially within the DON, the Marine Corps, and the Navy, have an understanding of technological maturity. What are the things that we can do now to make the force more capable now? Things that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine can use, as opposed to what are things we need to invest in over time so that we have advantage in the long term. And just to end, a simple thing like what the current commandant said about being the JTAC for the joint force. What that means now is a level of C2 interoperability that's never existed, that we can deliver now in many ways, but must be enhanced as we look to the future. And with that, I'll end because I know we want to get on to the next sections and we really want to get into the Q&A. So thanks. Enjoy the opportunity to participate.
Travis, Christian, thank you so much for a great set of opening remarks. And I know you didn't mean to miss out the Coast Guard when you mentioned Coast Guardsmen, Sentinels as well. Don't forget the Sentinels, and don't forget our U.S. flag merchantmen. They do important work as well. All right, Scott, over to you. Operations maintenance sustainment. An easy problem, right? We have all the money in the world and all the time.
Yeah, thank you, Admiral. My name is Scott Sant, 33 years in the Navy. Surface warfare officer. And as Sink said, the United States has huge operational responsibilities in the maritime commons. And just to put this in perspective, I want to give you some statistics here to wrap your head around how huge this challenge really is. 71% of the planet is made up of water. And of that water, 97% of it is salt water. And here's an interesting fact. Of that 3% of fresh water, the United States owns 43% of the fresh water in the entire world. And that's phenomenal. People go to war over fresh water. And that is what makes the United States the breadbasket of the world. But here are some other statistics you need to bring in together in the maritime common era. The United States owns 4.4 million square miles of exclusive economic zone water. That's from the shoreline out to 200 miles. That area is absolutely critical to the United States because it's full of minerals and fisheries and everything else in that water. And believe me, every minute of every single day, somebody is trying to take those resources away from us. Now, there's 95,000 miles of coastline in the United States. Think about that, 95,000 miles of coastline in the United States. Another statistic that a lot of people don't bring into play here, over 95% of the world's global financial transactions are carried on underwater communication cable network that goes out all over the world like spaghetti. And most of it comes into and out of the United States. If you ever take a graphic of that. The United States also is the largest producer of oil in the world at 19.3 billion barrels of oil per year. And this is phenomenal stuff here. And the aspect of this requires us to be forward deployed so we protect the sea lines of communication, the SLOCs. We need to protect the choke points. We need to protect the canals, all of those strategic areas around the world so that American trade can flow freely throughout the world and that we can protect our allies and our interests abroad. But yet, we only have 295 American battle force ships. 295, and only about 88 Coast Guard cutters. Think about that when you think of 4.4 million square miles of EEZ. And yet, within that, the CNO is trying to get to 80% readiness of those 295 ships, and the Coast Guard is right now about 65% of readiness. Now, when we talk about operations, you cannot leave out the pieces of maintenance and sustainment. To get one ship forward deployed and on station 365, 24/7, you need a ratio of about 3-to-1 or 4-to-1. That means I need 3 ships to keep one ship on station. One ship is in maintenance, one ship is in training, and one ship is deployed. That means you have to have a sufficient inventory. Now, we can't be everywhere because we don't have the size of the Navy that we need. And as Sink was talking about the call to action, this is critical, guys, because if you can't be everywhere, guess who's going to fill in the gaps? It's the bad guys. They're the ones that are going to exploit those gaps with smuggling drugs, smuggling, trafficking people. They're going to do piracy. They're going to smuggle weapons, and they're going to bring terrorism around the world. So the challenge is absolutely huge here. The call to action couldn't be more vibrant than it is right now. And I'll leave it at that right now and turn it back over to you, Sink. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Scott. And I think your camera might have dropped out, so try to get back to the visual here. But your remarks are absolutely correct. And I think something like 70% of the total obligation authority for the Navy is used just in sustainment, operations, maintenance, and those things. Probably the rest of the service is the same way. So this is a big challenge, and I don't think they have enough. Last but not least, we're going to go to John Kaskin. John, please enlighten us on the industrial base issues and our U.S. merchant fleet, which is too damn small.
Thank you, Sink. My name is John Kaskin, former senior naval logistician. Worked for the Navy for 33 years, and now I'm the chair of the Merchant Affairs Committee of the Navy League. My 2 units, the Defense Industrial Base and the Merchant and U.S. Flag Fleet, share one thing in common. Since the end of the Cold War, both have declined precipitously as we invested in the peace dividend savings to fund other national priorities, believing that we would never again have to fight a protracted war in a contested environment. We focused on efficiency, not resiliency, and reduced the number of shipyards capable of building large Navy and commercial ocean-going ships by more than half, reduced the number of tactical missile and fixed-wing manufacturers from 13 and 8 to 3 respectively, and lost 17,000 defense-related businesses over the last 5 years. Regarding the Merchant Marine, we shrank the number of ocean-going ships by more than 2/3, from 636 to 189 today. Unfortunately, as discussed by the previous speakers, we're now again facing peer competitors that can engage in protracted warfare and that can contest the movement of our sea services during a conflict. So now we are challenged to rebuild much of what we have divested over the last 35 years to regain the resilience and surge capacity we lost, particularly with respect to the industrial base and mariner workforces, which were seriously impacted by COVID, so that we barely are able to sail our ships and to certainly increase the production of our manufacturing industrial base. All the the talent that we had that was senior is retired, and we now have to rebuild it. Fortunately, both the administration and Congress have recognized this as a major concern and have recently begun to develop policies and programs to remedy the situation. The maritime policy sections that highlight these developments, such as the National Defense Strategy and follow-on implementation plans, efforts to create a new national maritime strategy to reinvigorate the U.S. flag shipping, shipbuilding, and associated labor workforces, and the congressional efforts such as the Ships for America Act bill to legislatively implement and resource the National Maritime Strategy. And finally, the very recent U.S. Trade Representative Section 301 findings report on the Chinese unfair maritime trade practices, which we'll find out later in the year how we will counter. So both sections end with recommendations for the administration and Congress to resource these programs and policies, which this will require billions of dollars beyond what we have programmed in the past. Well, there's been a good start in the submarine and some of the tactical missile industrial bases. Similar investments will need to be made in commercial shipbuilding and repair, and the U.S. flag shipbuilding, U.S. shipping, and labor force recruitment. The maritime policy will help provide both our Navy League legislative affairs advocates and the Hill the background that they will need to convince members of Congress to provide these additional resources that we know will be very challenging to obtain in this fiscal environment. Thank you. Sink, I'll pass it back.
And thank you, John. I was recently at a session where one of the British admirals said that over the past year or so, between the U.S., UK, and a couple others, maybe 3 merchant ships were built. Meanwhile, China built over 100. Well, quantity has a quality all its own. And this is a huge issue, part of it. And the last thing I'll say along your lines is our previous Navy Secretary, Honorable Carlos Del Toro, he talked about maritime statecraft. And I don't know what the new Secretary of Navy will decide to push, but I think there's a lot of logic in that maritime statecraft idea that needs to continue regardless. Okay, Luke, we got 176 people according to my little counter up here on the screen. I'm sure there's got to be at least one good question out there. So what do you have?
Yes, sir. We have our first question. Does the Davidson window still look operable today? What, if any, confidence does the Maritime Policy Committee have that Xi Jinping and the CCP will make a kinetic move against Taiwan within the next 3 years?
Okay, so I'll start, but I'll ask my other drafters, writers to comment as well. So this is Sinclair Harris' perspective. I have heard Admiral Davidson say, "Forget that window," out loud. And I think what he's saying is that it's even more urgent than before. CNO has talked any number of times about her countdown clock to January 1st, 2027, as having to make sure that we have that 80% force ready to go in order to keep that bad thing from happening. Would the PRC go kinetic by 2027? Could be. Could the Chinese economy, because it is not doing well, force a exaggerated move in order to distract their own populace? It happened before in history. So the punchline is that the Davidson window is something to be aware of. It could come sooner, but it just gives more impetus for the need to invest in our sea services to make sure that 2027, January 1st, 2027, is not when we go across the edge of the earth and into the abyss, but it's a time that makes the Chinese leadership say, now is not the time to go kinetic. Gentlemen, anybody else have any comments? Kristen?
I'll jump in. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about. Fight the night, every night in perpetuity. the challenge is there's not some moment in the future where we know what the enemy's exactly going to do, the kind of force that they're going to have, there we can prepare for that. It's like a football game. This is a game that we're going to have to be ready for every day. So one of the things, having been a readiness guy inside the Marine Corps for a long time, is that we need to kind of disabuse ourselves from just because the force is available means it's ready in relation to a competitor. We need to make that force as ready in relation to a competitor as we can do it, which means taking existing technology and applying it to the force, perhaps in novel ways, which the young service members will be open to much more than the older service members, but novel technology today that can make them better. Because what happens if they come in 6 months or 12 months or come twice? So every time we need to be better. So the question is we can't get caught up in going, I'm going to buy this widget that will be available in 2057. What can I do to make the force better now, which may not just be a technological solution, it may be a training solution. But we need to do these things across the .MLPF every day. And I'll turn it over to Travis.
Yeah, to complement that too, I think that there's a couple different things. I mean, everybody knows, who's been taking a look at this problem, that an amphibious challenge across the Taiwan Strait is probably one of the hardest things you could do from a shore to shore, let alone, ship to shore problem set. And so it's intensely complex. And the question is, do you want to risk it? Do they arrive to a national decision point inside of China and with the CCP that this is necessary for them? But one of the aspects of deterrence that, Christian's talking about, and another thing that we need to add into this, is a lot of the emphasis on setting the theater. So many of the things that are talked about in the NPS document itself relate to the ability to not only manufacture, but sustain the force. And so logistics as deterrence is super key. And so where we place those capabilities that show that not only can we engage the force, but we can sustain the force, factors into the calculus of the adversary about whether they want to continue. Because if they can't get a short, sharp, quick win to disrupt our capability because we can restore that force to action, or we can transition out those things that have been damaged and replace it with our war reserve capability, then that is a totally different set of metrics for them. And so the complement to logistics along with lethal force capability inside of that window basically just says, is there a practical time they could arrive to being able to do this challenge? 2027 is not an inappropriate one. But setting the theater now prior to 2027 is actually where our window starts. So the nexus point is 2027 and beyond, possible. 25 and next 2 years to build up that capacity to set the theater, essential. And that's where our fight and engagement begins, let alone, the contemporary things that Christian's talking about with the different types of engagements. And I'll turn over to Scott to add a comment as well.
Yeah, one of the things I want to make sure people understand is that the Chinese aren't 10 feet tall. Okay, they got some serious internal problems here. Sink already talked about they have some economic problems that are facing them and are going to be facing them over the next several years, which are pretty significant here. But they also have a demographic problem here that's going to make it impossible for Xi to actually do an invasion after about 2030. He's just not going to have the manpower to do what he needs to do. In addition to that, most of you have been reading probably in the news that he's had a lot of leadership problems here recently. And he's had to purge a lot of his own senior leadership in the PLA and the PLAN because they're not able to do their jobs. And the final thing is they don't have any combat experience. They're still learning some of the things that we've been doing for the last 70 or 80 years. Okay, underwave replenishment, flex ops on an aircraft carrier, amphibious operations that we wrote the book on. So the Chinese aren't 10 feet tall, okay? But they do represent a significant threat and one that we have to keep aware of and be ready to counter. What we have to do is be able to make it too costly for the Chinese to say, hey, this is a good day to do this. And as Travis said, coming across the Strait of Taiwan is very, very difficult. The weather over there in that part of the world is nasty all the time. It's very difficult to get landing craft in to Taiwan. There's only a window of about 6 weeks when you can do it. So there's a lot of tactical and other issues going into this calculus here that I think you need to keep aware of. That doesn't mean that you discount this as a threat. It is a very real threat. And also never forget that the Chinese always have a couple of aces up their sleeves in terms of a fifth column that's already resident there in Taiwan itself. That could cause a lot of havoc. But I do want to make that point that they're not 10 feet tall. Back to you, Sam.
And just to finish off this great question and discussion over this issue, let's not forget the work that's been done by Admiral Paparo, Indo-PACOM, Hellscape, and other things. They're not sitting on their hands. All right. Let's not forget that part of setting the theater involves our allies and partners. AUKUS, the work we're doing with Australia and UK, the work that's happening out by St. Pac Fleet with the other navies that are coming into the Pacific. So there's a lot of good work. Even more needs to be done to make sure that today is not the day, or tomorrow is not the day for kinetic action by our adversaries. And again, setting the theater is very important. Don't forget allies and partners. Great kickoff question, Luke. Let's give us another one.
Okay, our next question. What sort of investments or commercial support do you expect the new administration will take to support growing our domestic industrial base for U.S. shipbuilding? And could you tell us a little bit more about the Ships for America Act?
So I'm not going to give you the answer to this one because John Caskin's going to come off a mute here and has studied this far more than I. We don't know what the next administration or the current administration has got planned. But John, talk about the Ships Act and what your thoughts are, what needs to happen.
Thank you, Singh. The first test for the administration will be that U.S. Trade Representative Section 301 report. They had a year from when the suit was filed by the various labor unions about the unfair trade practices in shipbuilding, shipping, and the maritime industry overall. The findings just came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago, which said, yes, we have found that there has been unfair trade practices. The next step, which they have to complete over the next few months, is their recommendations on what actions to take. They could be countervailing tariffs. They could be, there have been lots of things that have been suggested by folks in the suit, such as every Chinese-built ship calling in the United States would have to pay a tax. Obviously, people who are operating these ships under U.S. flag are not, or in their fleets that have U.S. flag ships are not happy about that. So it is going to be something, a needle to have to be threaded to figure out what will be the appropriate actions to be taken. But there are a lot of proposals on that, and we'll see what the administration wants to do. Now, with respect to the Ships for America Act, this was put together initially by Congressman Waltz, now our National Security Advisor, and Senator Kelly, and has continued to been, and it was introduced at the end of last congressional session to help rebuild all 3 sectors of the maritime industry, the shipping, the shipbuilding, and the labor forces. It's about a 250-page bill. In the maritime policy, I have listed out the titles of what's in there and have a reference to the bill that's introduced. I can't go over it in detail, but basically it attempts to come up with what I would call is a new Merchant Act, which that last time has been updated is 1970. The Merchant Act of 1936 says we need all of these industries for economic and national security. The programs and policies that we have implemented since the end of the Reagan administration have not done that. So it has come up with various options, including a new fleet of commercial ships that would be subsidized, to add another 250 ships in foreign trade. It has a lot of effort on how to build up the labor forces, both in shipping and shipbuilding. It's very extensive. The issue is that it will cost about $2 billion a year, and they have suggested the creation of a maritime security trust fund, because the maritime industry does not have a trust fund like the aviation and the highway sectors, and that some of those funds would be diverted from revenues that already come into the Treasury that are maritime related, as well as others. And so that's really what the challenge is going to be, is to get the resources necessary. And $2 billion a year is not that much compared to what we really were spending in then-year dollars in 1980, when the U.S. Government was subsidizing the construction of 20 or 30 new ships a year and subsidizing the operation over 300. Right now, we're only subsidizing the operation of 70, and we have not done any program in place yet for shipbuilding. So there's a lot there. But I would recommend you take a look at the maritime policy section on the industrial base.
Hey, thanks, John. Hey, Travis, Christian, I think the question also talked about the technological advancements, the investments that need to be made. I'm thinking energy weapons, I'm thinking lasers, I'm thinking advanced manufacturing, multiple things of that nature, I think that you guys talked about. How about weighing in on that part?
All right, I'll jump in just for a sec, because I was thinking about it as I go back to 5G, future G, and responsible AI, and how those things apply. Because you talk about any administration, where are they going to want to invest in things that have dual use, that both have a commercial aspect to them and a military use aspect. We know, Senator Rounds, in all the recent hearings, he loves to ask all senior leaders about, what they think about electromagnetic spectrum and about the sale. But we know it's a global issue that has regional solutions. And at some point, we're going to have to figure out a way to optimize that, both for the defense of our nation and to get the most out of it for commercial use. So I definitely think that's something that we're going to have to do. The other one I know is, when we get to additive manufacturing, you start thinking about some of those technologies and the business rules associated with them, the legal aspects that need to be addressed, all those things that have great opportunity to impact the force, just like Travis talked about, not just at home, but if I can build it right where I am at, then I don't have to move it. And if I don't have to move it, then it can't be destroyed. So other than that, I'll kind of turn it over to Travis and let him see if he wants to pick up where I left off.
Yeah, adding a couple pieces there. One of the things about our section, relative to the defense industrial base, is it really talks a lot about what the ASN, so Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, put into place a couple of years ago, was the Wartime Acquisition Sustainment Support Plans, which are basically how to do acquisition resilience in armed conflict. How does our industrial base ramp up? And then the individual wartime acquisition response plans, which are by sector or force sustainment plans that talk about individually, hey, where do we need to emphasize some kind of industrial capacity during a period where we may see large mobilization and initiation of the Defense Production Act. I say that to say that, talking, with Christian and some of his points, is one of the issues that we have for building up the shipyards and the ability to manufacture is not just the large capital investment that comes with the shipyards themselves, but we have a human capital problem, which we just don't have enough workers within those spaces. So now we have to basically look at how do we augment humans with technology so that they can improve their capacity so that we can build at scale, knowing that we're a different nation when it comes to who the hands-on builders and artisans are. So one of the things our section talks about is, hey, look, we have to have investment in potentially mixed reality capabilities so that individuals who are walking the skin of the ship can carry with them the knowledge library and the procedures they need to be able to perform those tasks. We talk a little bit about the investment in robotics as well. What do humans who are working on these environments need for cobots and assistants that could potentially improve their ability to operate on some of the things that they have to manufacture? We talk a little bit about, as Christian mentioned, additive manufacturing. And its problem really is not the fact that we have printers and capabilities to do that. Our problem is being able to operate on network, have licensed and approved plans that are secure, that we can manufacture those parts locally, just to increase cycle time as we're talking about, those things that we may be able to manufacture on site in our shipyards, to be able to produce that device having a long supply chain or an individual manufacturer. As we know that defense consolidation has caused a problem where we may only have a mom and pop that at one point in time built a piece, and they no longer exist or in business. So we have supply chain management challenges across the board that even if you got the shipyards operating, may not be able to manufacture at scale because we've lost a lot of suppliers. So everything within the Ships Act, the large framework that John talked about, and what we've dealt with some of the decrement in our capability is also supplemented by the fact that we've got fewer people doing it, and we need to be able to provide them technologies at the place of manufacture that improve their capacity as well. So, and I'll turn it over to Scott. I think he's got a comment as well too.
Yeah, Sync, on this question here, in terms of the ops, maintenance, and sustainment aspect of it, when you look at the maintenance and the sustainment portion of it as it supports the ops part, at any one time right now, the U.S. Navy has about 1/3 of its ships forward deployed. It's about 100 ships. And it fluctuates a few ships here and there, but it's about 100 ships every single day. Now, you can imagine how much that weighs into the sustainment and maintenance portions of this stuff. And as John was talking about, the industrial base, it fits right into the maintenance aspect of it here. Because if you don't have enough ships to deploy, because they're not fully ready to go because of maintenance issues, then you're going to gap the areas like that. Then once those ships are deployed, you have to sustain those ships at sea for long periods of time. And that requires a supply system that's robust and able to fit back into the logistics networks, the maritime logistics forces, to actually keep those ships on station and in top order. Now, you can imagine here, over time, you start to wear these ships out. That's just what happens. A ship wears out and the crew wears out over time. When you don't have enough ships to give them a breather and you keep deploying them and redeploying them over time, the ship wears out. The problem with that, from a maintenance perspective, is you don't get to this end of life that you expected it when you first bought that ship. So if you thought you were going to get 30 years out of that ship, you may only get 20 or 25 years out of that ship. That comes back to the taxpayer. It's because we're burning the ships out because they're so forward deployed and so involved in all these operations around the world protecting U.S. interests. So the maintenance and the sustainment part go directly into what John was talking about. Over.
Sorry,
we've got you on mute.
No, yeah, sorry, I just missed my mute button here. But as you were talking, I was trying to find the report that the Coast Guard put out, similarly talking about their challenges and their need for more support in this area as well. And of course, Admiral Cottle down at Fleet Forces Command, he's been talking about being more surge ready. All these things call for more action today by industry, bringing technology, and by our American people, getting people involved in helping to bring up the level of capacity and readiness of the force. All right, two great, good questions that took up a fair amount of time. Luke, keep it going.
Our next question: how did we get behind on hypersonic missile technology, and how long before we are caught up and ready to field our own hypersonic missiles and be able to protect against them?
So this was a question that we discussed, I don't know how many different times. Let's see, who wants to start? Travis, Scott, Christian, which one of you wants to start on this one? Okay, Scott, go for it.
Well, the first question is, who says we're behind? Okay, you don't know everything. And there's a lot of things. I work for the Department of Defense High Performance Computing Modernization Program. We own all the supercomputers in the DoD, and which operate out of basically the service laboratories. And I can tell you there's a lot going on in the hypersonic world that a lot of people don't know about. And we're more careful about what we do. Anybody can throw a missile at Mach 5 or better. It's all the other aspects of targeting and lethality that you have to deal in. But I'll leave it at that for the other two guys.
That's right, because again, Scott's remarks do not reflect his office at the High Performing Computer people. That's just his own research. Okay, Kristen, Travis.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Was that Senator King from Maine? Every hearing, Senator King, he would say that we're behind on hypersonics. You know, there's been recent hearings. The Army and the Navy are working together on hypersonics. I think one of the bigger concerns is, in the near term, is hypersonic defense. But again, you know, what is available unclassed, what's been talked about in open hearing is one thing. What might be going on behind But the one thing I will say is we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that there's a problem that we can solve permanently. Jeffrey Parker and his Revolutions in Military Affairs since the 1500s pointed it out. It's all iterative. As soon as we come up with a new effort, somebody will come up with a counter. So that's what we've got to be more concerned about is how do we win this iterative competition every night? Because at the end of the day, it's the force that's forward that's going to have to fight at the tactical edge. And do they have advantage?
Excellent point. Travis?
Yeah, kind of picking up too, because this is an element within the weapons section. Is I'm less concerned about the offensive capability, as Scott's talked about. There's a lot of activity happening behind this that not discussable clearly in this forum, but I'm really much more concerned about the defensive capabilities too, and the proliferation across the different threat areas we've got, and the number of vessels that we have to support. So the legal restraints that deal with our merchant fleet in terms of their capacity to provide their defensive weapon systems. The policies behind high energy laser use and other electromagnetic systems. That has been back and forth constantly as an unresolved for a very long time in terms of how we're going to apply those largely, and the safety and operations measures that go within the fleet. That's an area that we actually really need to catch up in. And it's kind of a self-inflicted wound, self-owned, because we have a way to actually address how much risk we want to take in the near term based on the threat to get those systems more operable. I'm sure everybody saw the Preble, engagement with the Helios laser 2 days ago on a defensive system, and they've been trying to do all aspect engagement with those lasers for a very long time, not just low, slow flyers and drone defense capability. And that has been accelerated over the last 10 years. But I was a major in uniform, the Naval Surface Fires desk officer at Capabilities Development Directorate, addressing that particular system along with railguns in my portfolio at the time, and that was nearly 20 years ago. So, and we still haven't resolved the policy problem, let alone the actual technology and application. So we're at a point now where those defensive systems, in terms of counter ballistic missile defense, counter hypersonics, is really a thrust area that needs to catch up along with the development of the offensive systems. And many of them are policy related as well as technology related. And if we can get those two resolved very quickly, you can have a much more robust application even now with some of the prototype systems that are, again, factor into our adversary's calculus. Do I want to waste a low density asset that I have right now to engage a merchant vessel to disrupt logistics if I know that that vessel has the capability to defend itself against my seeker or some other function of my weapon? And that again is something that when we have an all aspect relationship to how we're addressing the ballistic missile defense problem and the counter ship missile problem, makes it harder on our adversaries to choose whether they want to progress up that ladder.
And thank you, Travis. Okay, we got about 10 minutes left. Go ahead, Luke. What's the next question?
Our next question, given current and projected budget constraints and total operating costs, as well as acquisition lead times of manned fighting platforms, how does the panel view the role of autonomous air, land, surface, subsurface, and space sensors and weapons?
So I'll go ahead and start off, but then turn it over to the rest of the gang. Hey, look, CNO Franchetti put out America's Warfighting Navy last year, and then she updated it again this year. In it, one of the things that she highlights is something she calls RAS, robotic and autonomous systems. And the whole point is that we need to get moving now and moving quickly and spend more, quite frankly, and industry needs to invest more in developing these systems, because you're right, we're not going to bend enough metal between now and 2027 to have a fleet the same size as China. We just won't. Okay, so we've got to use other type of platforms and systems, which we've already started doing in small ways in Middle East Task Force 59. You've read about it. In my old stomping grounds in Fourth Fleet, Task Force 49, and out in the Western Pacific. So there's much more emphasis to do to develop in these areas. And let's see, I'll go with Scott. I'll let you go first and then go to Travis and Kristen.
Well, I look at the unmanned aspect is it's a force multiplier, because what we're trying to do to the adversary is complicate their battle problem. And anything I can do to complicate their battle problem, I'm all for that. And if I can put 100 drones in the air or 1,000 drones in the air and 100 autonomous vessels in the water, I have complicated their battle problem significantly. They have to figure out what am I going to do and who I'm going to attack first. And as we've seen with in the Ukraine war, all it takes is a little speedboat, and you can cause a lot of havoc on warships. Okay, they lost significant warships. The Russians have lost significant warships with just a couple of little speedboats. So I'm all for the expansion of the unmanned fleets that we're going to have. And think about it in the next 20 to 30 years. We're going to have to go in that direction. There's just no way to get away from that. Over.
Yeah, I think about this a little bit differently, and probably no surprise, particularly from the land-based systems that Christian and I come from, where we're talking about expeditionary advanced-based operations, smaller teams operating in that environment where they need to be able to project a particular amount of power, and that requires the man-machine teaming, robotics, and autonomous systems relationships to be able to exist, for them to be able to operate many skilled capabilities in places where we can't just put a lot of humans. And even with the way that our forces are operating, to defy or remain undetectable. I'll say that to say that I used to work on a robotics and autonomous systems program where we ran the operators that were potentially going to use some of these capabilities under a series of war games. One of the things I realized quickly is that there were two big problems systemically that have to be handled. One is the networks to be able to operate a lot of those systems. So we have a communications and electronic signature problem and challenge that has to be overcome to be able to do this, and a lot of different ways to address that in a denied, degraded, and intermittent environment, from the electromagnetic spectrum that takes the ability to have mesh network operations and to be able to do this in a way that is survivable on a FIRES or sustainment web. The second problem is that we need a paradigm shift a little bit too in how we treat these capabilities. So a lot of people keep looking at them as an alternative platform. I'm basically taking a ship and adding another little ship and so on and so forth. But at the land-based force level, what you're really doing is adding a team member. And so now you've got a cognitive load challenge as well for the human, who has to be able to operate potentially a series or a family of robots as their teaming element to be able to do something that you used to assign a human to do that now has to be operated and affected by a robot. That we're looking for in that kind of partnership or operation. So that means that you're not looking at it as a platform, you're looking at it as a team member. And in that particular case, I'm not trying to put anthropomorphize any of these systems or add any of those elements within the artificial intelligence relationships there, but they have to be able to interact a little bit differently. And so because of that, you need to think about, hey, how would I take a team member that normally would do this activity and now deploy this system, and I'm an individual operator potentially with a family of robotics that I'm doing that normally I would have had a squad of humans to perform. And I need to be able to interchange between those robots very quickly, and I need to be able to assign them tasks that I would give them as a human so that I can basically have human speed response and the effect of having a lot of humans in that place. As Art Corbett used to say, the benefits of mass with none of the vulnerabilities, and that's kind of really what happens at our lower level. So where a lot of the naval systems and the aviators are looking at those cooperative combat aircraft systems and the surface platforms and subsurface platforms from the land-based, where we're looking at more of that teaming relationship and team member role that they would fill, let alone platforms that we would deploy then to engage and substitute for things that we're not manning necessarily in the future. And you can only do this kind of distribution if you've got some kind of robotic element to go along with it.
So I'm going to take it a little bit different direction. So a month ago, or about a month ago, maybe a little bit more, the Ukrainians ran an all robotic attack. The stories are already out. They already did it. So what I would suggest is that when we say we prepare for the last war, imagine if the last war is Ukraine and the Red Sea. Those are the last wars, not what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. But you think about how it goes even forward. But I agree wholeheartedly with Travis. The tactical tasks remain. How we're going to accomplish them. When we tried to cross no man's land in World War I, we put a tank. Why'd you put people in it? Because you had to. If you didn't have to, would you put people in it? No. But again, under the, it's under the, the command and control of a human being. But that being said, the more we think about this, the more we're going to have to resolve a challenge of edge computing. How much compute are we going to need on the edge to manage all these things? How much power? Admiral Franchetti has said that we're going to fight from the mocks. If we looked at the power and the critical infrastructure, when we think about the defending critical infrastructure from cyber attack, some that may be already pre-positioned. So I think we're going in that direction. The challenge is, if you look at the budgets, our money is tied up in people and major programs that already exist. So that's going to be the challenge going forward, is how do senior leaders reconcile that tension and put the appropriate budget behind it, because they have competing demands. Again, the people on the edge are asking, we need to fight, we need this now. But what I would also argue is that we need to give voice to the Indo-PACOM commander from 10 years from now, who may be a one-star or a colonel or a captain who doesn't have a vote in the room, but if the fight happens when they're in charge, they're going to need the capabilities. So we have got to do a better job at reconciling that. And I'll stop there.
Hey, John, please add more.
Just a complimentary comment. The industrial base, the replicator initiative has shown that there are elements of the industrial base that are not traditional providers in the national defense industrial base, and they have the ability to produce, are having the ability to produce large numbers of these unmanned vehicles. So I think that there is something there that is being taken advantage of. Not all of it is in the open source. And that was only $1 billion investment initially. So, and they're already on phase 2. So I think you will see more of that. I think people recognize it, at least in the previous administration, and I think they'll continue because it's in consonance with I think where the current administration is going. So we can take advantage of it. Now the question is scale and size. The traditional defense contractors have been building large systems, maritime systems that are unmanned, but as you get bigger, they get to be almost the same cost as a conventional manned ship. So it's the issue of what we can do in the near term, and I think the small scale, large number. I should say small sized, large scale numbers like Replicator or something that we can do now that can help confuse the peer competitor on how to adjust to how we will conduct our tactics and operations.
Thank you, John. Luke, I think we've come to the end of the hour, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. If you'd like, maybe we could finish with one final audience question, or we could just go into your final round of discussion.
Let's do one more audience question.
Okay, fantastic. I think we have a good one to end on. What is the most important role for us in your audience, who are average citizens, in terms of supporting this effort?
So if you ask Sinclair Harris, it is to write, email, talk to your elected official and ask them what they're doing to support American sea power. Do they think it's enough? Do they think that investments are enough in order to maintain a Navy, maintain a Coast Guard, maintain a Marine Corps, and maintain our merchant fleet? And the fact that it needs to be more than maintained, it needs to move forward. Second thing I would tell them is, if you got a kid, look, I got 3 kids who are in the Sea Cadets right now. All right. Don't know what they're going to do, but at least they're getting exposed to the importance of American sea power, and all the possibilities are there. I got a number of friends who have asked me to help their kid talk about NROTC or ROTC, or, we need to get all hands on deck. And so everybody has a part to play. And lastly, I tell you, if you were in the sea services, tell your story to others so they understand the importance of American sea power. Scott, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I would say again, the advocacy at the grassroots level is what really gets the ball rolling. And it's not just one time. It's every time you hear something on the news. Think back on the statistics I gave you. 4.4 million square miles of EEZ, and somebody's trying to take our stuff away every single day. Okay, so there's a reason why we have to have the sea power that Zink was talking about. It's absolutely critical for us. The United States can't get away from these responsibilities. That's all I have.
Thanks. Christian, I'm gonna come to you, John. Christian?
Oh, I'm excited. The days are gone when Oliver Hazard Perry and his crews could go to the Great Lakes and cut down trees and build a ship and fight a battle. That was hundreds of years ago. We need sustained effort from the whole of nation, all aspects, from industry, from the workforce, from the Congress, from the people, because we can't build it tonight. It's going to take years to develop this. And as Scott brought up, the undersea cables, people are just becoming aware that how much data goes there and how do you protect them? So if we're going to protect ourselves in all domains, and the sea domain touches them all, then we're going to have the sustained effort. It's not a single administration, a single Congress. It's generational. Building a workforce that joins now, that's still building ships 25 years from now, better, faster, and more affordably than anybody else in the world. So that's what I would suggest, is that we need to think long term. And if we don't think long term, then we're just going to be surprised over and over again.
Thank you. Travis?
Yeah, becoming involved, it's kind of interesting, as Christian talked about, you're going to discover that the maritime industries are in different places. So previous generations grew up and there was something that was happening probably in their town in industrial America that they saw that contributed directly to an industry. You couldn't go to Baltimore or Bethlehem or Bath or any other place, and you probably knew somebody who worked in the yards, and those places have shrunk. But the reverse is, because of the way that technology works and the way that we're contributing into maritime education and the proliferation of social media and the ability for your voice to be heard, if you have a company that's interested in these industries, there's probably a Naval X or Tech Bridge that exists that you can become involved in and participate as a sponsor for your technology, contributing to ideas within how the Navy will resolve its future industrial challenges. And they're great. So not only is it just uniform services, but it's also that new industrial base that we're talking about that has a different place that it can be found. I think the second thing is that there's so many different ways now that we've got publications where you can write and contribute. If you're an expert on this particular call, and you know that you can go into War on the Rocks and the Navy Leagues magazine or into Proceedings or other places, write and contribute. The deluge of that information is where, right now, people who make those decisions are searching very quickly for ideas that they can acquire to introduce into legislation and introduce into policy. So, there's a way for you to be participating differently in industry than our predecessors did, but it's a new way of thinking about it. I know that a lot of those places feel like they can kind of fall a bit short too. Hey, what's the transition between good idea and technology innovator into an actual acquisition or something that we maintain and sustain? And that bridge has not been mastered particularly well. So if you're a policy guy, help us complete that chain, stop these valleys of death, so that you can be in a spot where we actually have a transition pathway from thing that can rapidly be developed that we know can, to that which can actually be permanently introduced and sustained. That's the biggest problem that a lot of us who work in these spaces have, is that between the idea and the ability to implement it quickly is a 10-year cycle typically. So even though Christian's talking in the long term, too, there's some other things that we need to really shorten. And it's not just the ability to produce, it's the ability to decide and accept an idea and move it into implementation. And that's one of our biggest struggles right now. So those are the three areas of find where the new industry, write and participate. And if you're in policy in these environments, help us shorten these timelines. Turn it over to John.
Bring us home, John. You're muted.
I would focus on the individual level, in the sense that I think almost everybody that's on this webinar is a Navy League member. If not, join the Navy League. But as a Navy League member, are you a member of your legislative affairs organization in your council? If not, become a member of that organization. If it doesn't exist, lead it, because we need a legislative advocacy program is how we communicate with Congress. It is a way that we, through the maritime policy and then the training that you get as a member of the legislative advocacy team, that you will be able to go to interface with those members of Congress and convince them that this is what we need to do. And the Legislative Affairs Program will provide you the information and the training necessary to do that. So this is what I would suggest, in addition to everything else that's been mentioned. As an individual, you can contribute. And I started this a long time ago. And as a former Vice President of Legislative Affairs, I've been amazed how we've been able to interface with members of Congress and to help them get directed to put the resources that are going to be necessary. But as it's been mentioned, we're in a very fiscally constrained environment, and we have to convince those members that whatever resources that are harvested from all the other actions that are going on, some of it has to be invested in the areas that we just talked about. Otherwise, our economic and national security are at risk. Thank you.
So gentlemen, I was going to have a wrap-up session, but I think that pretty much did it right there. A couple of things to finish off for everyone. Number one, I want to thank the 148 or so people that are still online for listening for this hour or so. We could have gone on for a lot longer, but we appreciate your attention, appreciate your questions. Number two, there are two members of our group that were not part of this discussion because they just weren't available. But I want to thank Rear Admiral Carrie Thomas, U.S. Coast Guard retired. She helped especially in that manpower area to bring those issues to light. And then Vice Admiral Sandy Stokes, who helped us, especially in the training doctrine area. So the two Coast Guard officers that really helped us, along with the folks here, John, Travis, Christian, Scott. It's been a pleasure working with you in the development of this and today. And to thank the voice of Luke Lorenz, who was asking our questions, and he's been the cattle herder throughout the whole time of getting this together. And again, thank Evan and James for the technological help. Now, final word, join the Navy League. You want to help? There you go. That's a good start. Okay, Luke, we're done.